The boy was screaming again. His little boots scrabbled against the packed earth floor, fists pounding the wool blanket wrapped tight around him, as if that might make the cold leave his bones. But the cold was in him now. It had climbed inside like a snake coiling around his ribs, and no matter how many times he cried out, no matter how long his mother held him close in the darkness, it didn't leave. "Ma, hurts!" he sobbed, face buried against her breast, hot tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on his cheeks. "I know, baby, I know," she whispered, rocking slow on the straw mattress laid atop the planks above the barn ceiling. The timbers groaned gently under her weight, heavy with snow above and livestock heat below. "You just keep breathing. Mama's got you. Mama's here." He was 6. He hadn't cried like this since the week after his father was buried. That first frost had stolen more than the old man's breath. It had stolen the boy's voice, too. For a long time. Now it had come back only to tremble, to break. "Where's the sun, Mama?" he whimpered. She couldn't tell him the truth, that it hadn't shown itself in 5 days, that the blizzard had turned everything outside to death-colored white. That wind kept clawing at the gaps in every neighbor's log walls like wolves hunting for the last warmth left in a man's bones. So instead she just held him tighter, pressed her lips to his forehead, and prayed the warmth rising from the floorboards below would hold. Because if it didn't, if the warmth from the cattle and goats and hens living in the barn underneath them gave out, then so would he, and then she'd be alone again. Her name was Letty Sloan, and she had built the barn beneath her cabin with her own calloused hands. Folks called her foolish, said it was backward, said it was unsanitary, even ungodly. The preacher from the Valley settlement had ridden out in spring just to frown at her through his spectacles and murmur something about pestilence and bad air. But Letty wasn't trying to impress the church. She was trying to survive. When her husband Elijah was kicked in the head by their mule 2 winters back, and left her a widow with 2 small children and a homestead half-built, she'd learned real fast what mattered and what didn't. The winters were getting meaner, the wind more violent. The trees had stopped cracking from the weight of snow and started snapping off like matchsticks. Neighbors with double-chimney cabins and thick log walls still found frost creeping inside by January. So Letty built downward. She dug until her palms blistered, until her nails tore and bled. She hauled out rock by hand, timbered the walls, laid stone in a half-circle beneath where the cabin would sit. And when the barn below was sealed and solid, she built her 2-room home directly above it, floor timbers thick and caulked tight with clay and moss. Then she moved her animals in: 12 goats, a milk cow, 4 hens, 2 pigs, and 1 old plow horse with a busted knee. And the heat, oh the heat, it rose up through the floor slow and sure, like soup simmering on a hearthstone. It wasn't summer warm, but it was survivable. She could feel it now, beneath her knees as she rocked her boy. That was the only reason he hadn't frozen through like the Whitmore children down the ridge. She knew because 3 days ago one of their boys, Jeb, had stumbled up to her porch through waist-high snow, half frostbit, babbling that his mother had tried to burn a chair for heat, and the whole place had gone up in smoke. His baby sister didn't make it. Letty had taken him in. She gave him goat's milk and stripped his wet clothes. She laid him near the stove, beneath a pile of quilts, and when he finally stopped shivering, she let him cry. That same night, while the wind howled louder than the cattle lowing below, she'd pulled a heavy plank off the barn floor and climbed down the ladder to check on her herd. The animals were huddled tight together. Steam curled from their bodies, the hay damp with heat. 1 hen was nestled on a beam just beneath the stovepipe's iron belly, and she looked up at Letty like she knew she'd been part of a miracle. The laughing had started the moment Letty began digging. The McPhees, 3 brothers with thick necks and loud mouths, used to ride past and shout things like, "Building a mine shaft, widow. And you planning to strike oil or just bury your pride?" Even women in town would whisper behind her back, said it was unnatural to sleep above animals, said it would draw bad luck, bad men, or worse. The only person who hadn't mocked her was old Jasper Klein, a trapper who lived farther up the ridge, alone since before the war. He'd squinted at her muddy hands and said, "Fools die loud, smart folks live quiet." Then he'd handed her a dull pickaxe and walked away. But now that her barn was warm, and the Whitmore girl was dead, and every other cabin in 3 miles had gone dark. No one was laughing, at least not out loud. The knocking came near midnight. It wasn't the wind this time. It was sharp, desperate. Letty stirred, heart jumping. She slid her arm gently from beneath her son's head and crept toward the door, boots silent on the plank floor. When she opened it, the storm almost knocked her over. Snow flurried in like bees swarming a broken hive, and standing there, bareheaded, shaking, was Clara McPhee. Her lips were blue. She was cradling something wrapped in burlap against her chest. "Please," Clara croaked. "Please, it's my baby." Letty yanked her inside. The girl was barely more than a child herself, married at 16 to one of the McPhee boys, and pregnant before her wedding dress had dried. Now her hands were raw, her cheeks blistered with cold. Letty helped her peel the frozen cloth away. The infant inside was eerily still, face pale and drawn, but when she pressed her ear to its tiny chest, she heard it, a heartbeat, faint, struggling, but alive. For the next hour, Letty worked like she was pulling her own child back from the grave. She laid the baby beside her son, who'd finally fallen into a fevered sleep. She stoked the stove, pulled out every blanket she owned, stripped off her own coat and hat to press more warmth into that fragile body. Clara sobbed in a corner, hands shaking so bad she couldn't hold the cup of milk Letty offered. Finally, sometime before dawn, the baby whimpered. Letty and Clara both froze. Then it cried, weak and thin, but real. Letty's knees buckled, and she dropped beside the bed, pressing her forehead to the quilt, whispering thanks to a god she hadn't spoken to in years. Down below, a goat bleated, and outside, the wind began to die. By the time the storm cleared 2 days later, there were 6 more people living above Letty's barn. A widow from miles out who'd dragged her sick father on a sled, a boy from the river bend with frostbitten hands, and a starving dog, and finally Jasper Klein himself, who showed up with a sack of meat over his shoulder and muttered, "Could smell the warmth halfway to the ridge." The cabin groaned under the weight of bodies and blankets, but the barn kept them warm, and when the spring thaw came early, and they buried the ones the snow hadn't spared, folks in town didn't laugh anymore when they spoke her name. They whispered it, like maybe she'd done something holy or haunted, or maybe both. The thaw didn't come with birdsong or the smell of wet pine. It came with rot. Snow melted off rooftops and rolled down hillsides in grey sheets, soaking into earth that had frozen too deep and too long. Roads turned to sludge. Graves shifted in the night. A creek near the Miller homestead swelled and swallowed their chicken coop whole, leaving nothing behind but a drowned rooster floating, belly up in the cattails. Letty stood on her porch with her arms crossed tight over her chest, watching the slope behind her barn melt inch by inch. The once white world had turned into a landscape of sickness. Brown, yellow, grey. The wind was warmer now, but it carried the stench of everything the snow had hidden. Death, mostly. Inside the cabin, Clara was boiling milk and humming to the baby, who'd taken to the goat's milk like it was his own mother's breast. Jasper was sharpening a knife by the window, eyes narrowed, pausing now and then to glance down at the barn floor, where a plank had been left loose so the heat could still rise. 3 of the goats were coughing. Not a good sound. Could be nothing. Could be the beginning of sickness. She'd seen rot take a whole herd before, but it wasn't just the livestock she was worried about. It was the people. Since the storm broke, more had come. At first just the desperate ones, ragged, starving, stumbling like they hadn't eaten in days. Letty turned no one away. She couldn't, not after watching that McPhee baby twitch back to life like a spark catching on dry moss. After that, every knock on her door felt like a test. And yet, the more people arrived, the more she felt it, the shifting, the way the air inside changed from grateful to expectant, from quiet to uneasy. 16 souls now lived under her roof. 3 children, 4 old men, 2 widowed sisters who hadn't spoken to each other in 6 years, until Letty shoved them both into the same bed and told them to act like kin or sleep in the barn proper. There was no more room, and yet someone else was coming. She saw him from the porch that morning. A man on foot, no coat, boots wrapped in burlap, one hand gripping a makeshift walking stick. He limped through the mud-snow mix like a man who'd been dragging his will behind him for days. By the time he reached the porch, he didn't even speak, just collapsed face first onto the steps. They stripped him down and found frostbite on one hand, purple and blistered, and a gash on his calf that had festered beneath layers of dirty rags. Jasper muttered under his breath and got to cleaning it with boiled pine pitch and a rag. "He's lucky he ain't dead," the trapper said. "Or maybe he is, and he just don't know it yet." But the man lived. 2 days later, he opened his eyes and whispered a name. "Bo!" Then again, "Bo! Han!" Clara leaned over him, voice soft. "You're safe now, mister. This is Letty Sloane's place. You're in her cabin." He blinked slowly, as if that name meant something. And maybe it did. Letty wasn't there when he woke. She was down in the barn, sleeves rolled to her elbows, arm buried nearly to the shoulder inside a goat struggling to give birth. The young doe was on her side, panting hard, and Letty could feel the hooves twisted inside. Britch. Wrong angle. Death angle. She grit her teeth and worked slow, talking to the animal as though it could understand. "I know it hurts," she murmured, "but we got to keep it moving. You hear? We got to keep going." It was nearly an hour before she pulled the kid free, slick, blue-tinged, limp, but it wasn't dead. She slapped its side. It jerked, cried, then another. Twins. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. Then she sat back on her heels and let the warmth of the barn wrap around her like a second skin. It smelled of hay, milk, animal sweat, and survival. It smelled like home. When she climbed the ladder back up, the man was sitting upright against the wall. He looked thinner in the light, early 40s, scar above his left brow, old break in the nose. His eyes tracked her like he knew her already. "You're Letty," he said. She stiffened. "I am. You're the one that built the furnace barn," he said. "The upside-down house." She crossed the room, expression hardening. "And you, ah?" "Name's Bo Hannah," he said, offering a weak smile. "Your husband and I laid roof beams on the Miller cabin 3 years back. Elijah Sloan. Fine man." Letty froze. Something stung in her chest. "You knew Elijah?" "I did," Bo said, and his voice turned quiet. "Helped carry him out of the gully after that mule kicked him. Stayed with him till the preacher came." She hadn't known that part. Elijah had died before the preacher arrived. That much the men had told her. But none had said someone had stayed. None had said someone had held his hand while he slipped away. Bo Hannah had, and now he was here. Over the next week, the cabin settled into its strange rhythm again. Letty kept moving, boiling milk, treating wounds, checking on the livestock. Jasper continued his silent watch, carving spoons and sharpening traps. Clara tended the baby. The two widowed sisters resumed their long-forgotten bond, and were often found whispering over the stove. Bo stayed quiet at first, too injured to do more than hobble from bed to window. But his eyes missed nothing. He watched how Letty worked, watched how others deferred to her without words. "She's the only reason we ain't buried in snow," Jasper said one night when someone muttered about leaving. Bo nodded but didn't speak. Later, when everyone else was asleep, he found Letty on the porch again, staring out at the spring-thawed slope behind the cabin. "You're not just surviving," he said. "You built something bigger." She didn't answer. "You turned this cabin into a refuge," he said. "That's not nothing." Still, she said nothing. After a long pause, Bo looked down at the frostbit hand wrapped in cloth. "It should have taken my fingers, maybe my life." "Then why didn't it?" she asked flatly. He met her eyes. "Because I kept walking toward the warmth," she swallowed, then nodded once, and walked inside. But warmth, as it turned out, had limits. By the third week of thaw, one of the goats died. Then a second. Jasper found a blood trail in the barn, a streak smeared across the hay, ending in a heap of collapsed limbs. No sign of wolves, no marks of violence, just stillness. "Some sickness," he said, inspecting the tongue, the eyes. "Like something rotted from the inside?" Letty's stomach turned. They burned the bodies, but it didn't stop. 2 more goats, then a hen, then the milk cow began to wheeze. Clara, pale with fear, said, "If we lose the barn, we lose the heat," and they all knew it. The warmth that had saved them was now betraying them, or being betrayed by rot and too many bodies pressed into too small a space. The barn beneath the cabin had kept them alive in winter, but in spring the very design became a curse. Moisture pooled in corners, mold grew fast, manure, once frozen and harmless, turned sour and dangerous in the warming air. Jasper said, "It's turning septic. We've too many animals down there, too many people up here. The heat's rising with more than just warmth." Letty's voice was hoarse when she asked, "How long do we have?" The trapper gave no answer, but she knew, not long, so she made a decision. "Everyone out," she said the next morning. A dozen faces stared back at her. "We're building a second shelter," she explained. "One for the livestock. They can't stay beneath us through spring. We'll dig into the hill, just enough to house the goats and cow. I'll seal the old barn off. The cabin's warm enough now without it." Jasper grunted. "It'll take days." "We'll do it in one," she said. Bo stood. "I'll help. I need every hand that can hold a shovel," she said. "We dig or we rot," and dig they did. From sunrise to long after dusk, they carved a hollow into the wet hill behind the cabin. They used old timber from a collapsed barn up the ridge. Bo dragged stone with one hand, his other arm still wrapped. The widowed sisters hauled hay in baskets. Clara sang lullabies to keep the children from crying. Letty didn't sleep. By the third night, the new shelter was sealed. The animals moved in, and for the first time in months, the cabin above fell silent. No more bleating through the floorboards, no more hoofbeats in the dark, just the soft sounds of wind and breath and the slow creak of wood settling. And still, it stayed warm, 42 degrees warmer than outside, by Letty's last count. No fire burning, no stove lit, just walls packed thick, a roof layered with clay and thatch, and the heat of all those weeks sealed in tight. Her children slept without coughing. The McPhee baby smiled in its sleep, and Letty Sloan stood at the door of her cabin, mud on her hands, straw in her hair, and watched the stars rise clean and quiet above the slope she'd carved with her grief. No one laughed now. No one would again. The ground held the memory of winter long after the air had softened. Below the surface, roots still clutched frozen soil. Earthworms lay curled in stiff circles. Ice clung to the undersides of stones. But up above, the world pretended at spring. Buds swelled on dogwood branches. Creek water gurgled from melting drifts, and the long, slow stink of thawed death wafted in from the neighboring valleys. Letty Sloane didn't sleep much anymore. Now that the barn had been cleared and resealed, and the animals relocated to the dug-in shelter at the hill's edge, she found herself walking the property each night, barefoot sometimes, wrapped in her husband's old coat, lantern in hand. She listened to the soil as it groaned. She smelled the shift in the wood. She checked the corners of the cabin for new rot, and ran her hand along the seams of the roof where snowmelt might try to creep in. But mostly she watched the people, because something in the air had changed. Not the temperature, not the pressure, the people. It had begun subtle, just after the sickness passed. Jasper no longer muttered to himself at the stove. He started pausing before speaking, watching others first. Bo Hannah moved quieter than before, sometimes vanishing for half a day, returning with rabbit pelts or nothing at all, face unreadable. Clara began keeping the baby closer, even when the cabin warmed past comfort. And Letty noticed that some eyes followed her longer than others, studied her when her back was turned, not with suspicion, but with something else, something weighing, measuring, calculating. She had given them warmth, shelter, milk, a second chance, and that meant something to them. But what exactly, she wasn't yet sure. It was a cracked egg that started it. Not the shell, but what was inside. A child, 8-year-old Myra, quiet as stone since her mother froze mid-blizzard, brought it up to Letty one morning, hands cupped like an offering. "It stinks," the girl said simply. Letty took the egg, turned it in her hand, and cracked it gently against a bowl. Black. The yolk had turned black, thick and tar-like. The smell hit hard, made her gag. She buried it, then went down to the animal shelter with Jasper. 3 more eggs the same. 2 hens already dead, though no wounds marked them. "Could be spoilage," Jasper said, not sounding convinced. "Bad feed. Too many damp days?" But Letty wasn't sure. She could feel something deeper, something rot-bellied, something crawling up from the earth, not just down from the air. That night she burned the hay nearest the coop and spread ash over the ground. She didn't ask permission. She didn't explain herself, and no one questioned her, not even Bo, who stood on the hill's edge, watching the smoke curl into the pale sky like he'd been expecting it. The next day, one of the widowed sisters was gone. Agnes, the younger one. Her bed was empty. Boots gone, no note. The others searched. Jasper followed the creek for nearly 2 miles. Bo took the trail north toward the logging camp ruins. Letty went west, toward the ridge. They found nothing. No tracks, no blood, no signs of a struggle, just gone. Some whispered that she'd finally lost her mind, that the winter had starved something inside her that couldn't be fed back. But Letty didn't believe that. Agnes had been singing the day before, her hair brushed, her voice steady. She'd started kneading bread again, even humming an old church tune while doing it. No, Letty thought. She didn't vanish. She was taken, by the land maybe, or something in it. The strange warmth persisted. Even without the barn below, the cabin remained unnaturally warm. Bo measured it once with an old mercury thermometer he'd traded off a trapper 3 winters ago, 41 degrees above outside temperature. No stove lit, no bodies crowded together, just heat. Jasper muttered that maybe the cabin had absorbed the livestock warmth, held it tight like a root cellar holds coolness in summer. But that wasn't how wood worked, or air, and Letty knew it. She said nothing. But that night, she found herself kneeling beneath the floor again, pushing up the plank she'd sealed 2 weeks earlier. She lowered the lantern into the black. Nothing moved, no sound, just the stillness of packed hay, now half-molded, the scent of something too sweet, too still. She stared longer than she meant to, then closed it again, nailed the plank down, this time with iron. It was Bo who broke the silence 3 days later. They were alone, chopping wood at the tree line. Spring rain had softened the trunks, made the birch bark peel like dead skin. "She didn't walk away," he said suddenly. Letty kept chopping. "I know. Agnes wasn't the kind to run. I saw her give a man 10 years younger a black eye for grabbing her wrist once. I know," she repeated. Bo dropped his axe. "I think there's something in the ground." She froze. "Something we woke up," he continued. "Or disturbed." "You think it took her?" He shook his head. "Not like that. Not teeth and claws. Not ghosts. Just pull. Like gravity, like something below wants something above." Letty turned then, met his eyes. "You felt it too?" "Since the first night I slept here." They stared at each other a long time, then both looked toward the cabin, small, neat, warm and silent. That night Letty set watch. She didn't say it aloud, but Bo understood. He sat by the door while she took the back wall, each with a lantern, each pretending it was just to check leaks from the rain. At 3 in the morning, Letty saw the floorboards rise, just slightly, a fraction of an inch. a slow bulge, like breath. Then it fell again. She rose, quietly crossed the room, and placed her hand flat against the plank. Warm, too warm. She didn't scream, didn't even speak, but she didn't sleep either. The next morning they opened the floor again. Bo with a pry bar, Letty with the lantern. Jasper stood nearby, arms crossed. They peered into the dark. The barn looked the same. Hay matted, no movement, until Bo dropped the lantern. It hit soft, too soft. He climbed down. Letty followed. They found the imprint first, just beneath the plank. A perfect oval depression in the hay, long and shallow, as if something had been lying there. Not animal, not human, just shape. Then Jasper dropped in behind them and pointed. Over there! Letty turned. Against the far wall, something pulsed, a soft rise and fall in the hay, like breath. She stepped closer, and then she saw it. A root, except not. It glistened, like fat, like old meat. It twitched once, then withdrew into the ground. She stepped back hard, heart thudding. Bo raised his knife. Letty grabbed his arm. No, it's in the soil, she whispered. It's always been in the soil, Jasper muttered. Then we burn it. No, Letty snapped. It fed us. It saved us. She caught herself, and everyone went quiet, because she wasn't wrong. It had saved them, fed them warmth when nothing else could. But now it wanted something back. That night, Letty gathered everyone, every soul still left in the cabin. Clara, her baby, the river boy, the old men, the widowed sister alone now, Jasper, Bo. She told them everything, about the warmth, the breath, the shape, the root. She didn't dress it in fantasy, didn't call it monster or miracle, just truth. It's in the ground, she said, and it wants something. Silence followed. Then the old trapper spoke. You think it wants us? I think it wants what we took, Letty said. Heat, life, safety. We pulled from it all winter, never gave anything back. Bo looked up. So what do we do? Letty took a breath. We offer it something. No one died that night. No one vanished. But no one slept either. Letty sat on the porch until dawn. She didn't pray. Not exactly, but she spoke aloud anyway, to the wind, to the ground, to the shape beneath her floor. I see you, she whispered, and I know you see me. No answer, but the ground didn't move again, and the warmth held steady. For now, the weather turned, not colder, not quite, but stranger. Clouds began to sit lower on the hills, draping the ridges in a wet, perpetual dusk. Rain didn't fall in sheets or storms anymore. Instead it wept, slow, steady, a fine mist that never stopped. It beaded on skin like sweat and clung to the cabins like breath against glass. The creek swelled, then stilled, the current dulled to a creeping, unnatural crawl, and the trees, all of them, grew too quiet. Even the birds stopped singing. Jasper said it reminded him of the moments before a storm, when animals went silent and dogs refused to lie down. But there was no storm, just the waiting and the watching, because everyone in Letty Sloane's cabin had seen it now, the thing beneath the floor. Not the whole of it, but its effect, its breath, the warmth it gave, the shape in the hay, the root that wasn't a root. They knew it was real, and it knew they knew. It started taking again. At first it was little things. The hens began laying blood-tinged eggs. A goat birthed a stillborn kid whose mouth was full of dirt. One morning Letty woke to find the cabin's rear wall slick with something like sap. But it wasn't sap. It was warm, sticky, pulsing faintly like a second heartbeat. By midday it had dried into a dark smear that no one could scrub clean. And then the second widow, Edith, was gone. Same as Agnes. One moment there, boiling water at the hearth. The next, vanished. No scream, no sound, just absence. They searched again, this time farther. Jasper rode as far as the lumber ridge. Bo checked the old mineshaft ruins. Letty paced the perimeter of the shelter until her boots tore open at the toes. Nothing. Only Clara said what they all thought. It took her. No one argued. Not anymore. The ground had grown hungrier. Letty could feel it in her teeth, an ache that hadn't been there before, a low hum that buzzed behind her molars when she stood too long near the sealed floorboards. She'd moved her children, her son and the McPhee baby, into the loft, higher ground, but it didn't help. The warmth was rising faster now, thick and humid, like breath against skin. You could taste it, smell it, sweet, sour, wrong. Bo measured the temperature again. It's climbing. How much? Letty asked. He showed her the cracked thermometer. 57 degrees warmer than outside. That couldn't be possible, but it was. No fire burned. No sun showed, and yet the cabin sweated, the walls dripped, the earth steamed. And at night, something knocked once from below. Not loud, just one knock. Always at the same time, always when she'd just started to fall asleep. I'm going back down, Jasper said. He was standing at the trapdoor with a rifle in one hand and a crowbar in the other. Letty blocked him. No, you think we can just wait it out? He growled. That thing ain't giving us a choice. We don't know what it is. We know enough, he snapped. It gave us warmth. It took people. Now it wants more. That ain't a god. That's a parasite. Letty didn't move. It saved us. At what cost? They stared each other down. Bo stepped between them. Then we go together. Jasper hesitated, then nodded once. The three of them descended, Letty with a lantern, Jasper with his rifle, Bo with nothing but a long iron hook used to drag hay bales. The barn looked the same at first, quiet, still, but the air was worse, thicker. It clung to their lungs like smoke, except it didn't burn, it smothered. The hay was darker now, and damp beneath their boots. In the far corner something pulsed again, slow, like a sleeping heart, or a breath that had never stopped. Letty moved first. She knelt beside the floor, swept the hay aside, and found the hole, small, round, fresh, like something had bored up from below, not down from above. It pulsed at the edge, wet, glowing faintly amber in the lantern light. Jasper raised the rifle, but before he could aim, the ground beneath him shifted. He fell hard, cursing. Bo yanked him up by the collar. The hay writhed, not fast, not like snakes, but slow, like muscle. Letty grabbed her lantern and flung it down the hole. It fell 5 feet, maybe 6, hit something wet, sputtered, and went out. They sealed the barn again, this time with stone. Jasper wanted to burn it, but Bo argued, what if fire feeds it? Letty agreed. So they packed the entry with earth, hauled flat river stones, and built a crude seal, mortared it with clay, then dragged the heavy iron stove from the shelter and wedged it across the top. It wouldn't hold forever, but maybe it would buy time. The next night, no one vanished. The night after that, a child screamed in her sleep. Letty ran to the loft, heart pounding. Little Myra was thrashing, eyes shut, mouth open wide, but the scream had no voice. She was choking. Letty turned her over, beat her back. Something slid from the girl's throat. A root, 6 inches long, wet, pink, still twitching. Letty hurled it into the stove. Bo lit a fire without speaking. That night, Letty stood outside the cabin, staring down into the dark trees. Jasper joined her. You ever think we made a mistake? He asked. I've made plenty. I mean building here, building down, putting the barn under the house. Maybe the old ways existed for a reason? She didn't answer. He rubbed his jaw. I saw a thing once. When I was a boy, Pa had a cellar dug too deep, hid a pocket of something. Roots in there were white like bone. They moved. Pa poured salt and kerosene, burned the whole thing. Did it stop? He hesitated. The next spring, Ma didn't wake up. Just didn't. No reason. Doc said maybe her heart, but she was only 30. Letty stared ahead. You think it followed you here? I think whatever's under us has been here longer than we have, longer than the Comanche, longer than trees. He looked at her. You gave it a gift, Letty. Warmth, blood, breath. Now it wants more. I know. Bo found her at dawn, sitting in the dugout shelter, staring at the goats. They know something's wrong, she said, without looking at him. They stopped eating. They know. He sat beside her. Neither spoke for a long time. Then he said, I've been thinking about the way it moved, the way it breathed. She turned. It's not just feeding, he said. It's growing. Letty nodded slowly. I know. If we leave, it'll follow. If we stay, it'll take. They sat in silence again. Then Bo said, what if you're the only one it wants? She turned sharply. What? It started with you. It fed you. It grew under your house. It protected your children. Maybe it doesn't want people. Maybe it wants you. Letty laughed bitterly. That's worse. Maybe, he said quietly, but it gives us a choice. That night, Letty packed a satchel, 3 pieces of bread, her father's Bible, a cloth-wrapped knife, 1 match. She left a note for her son, didn't kiss him goodbye, couldn't, climbed down the ladder at midnight, pried open the stones, slipped inside, and let the dark close over her. She walked down. The tunnel was deeper than it should have been, longer. The air grew hotter the farther she went, until her skin beaded and her breath rasped. She passed bones, not animal, not human, something between. She passed roots that blinked, stones that wept sap, and always, always she felt it watching, until she found it. The chamber was wide, hollowed like a lung, and in its center a mass, not beast, not root, not alive, not dead, just pulse. She stepped forward. It pulsed back. She dropped to her knees. I know, she whispered. I know what you are. It didn't answer, but it didn't need to. She placed her hand on the mass, and for one instant, one breath, she felt it. The memory of warmth, not heat, not fire, warmth, the kind that comes from breath, from blood, from a body. This thing, it had once been alive, not now, not anymore, but something of it remained. And it remembered cold, remembered hunger, and it had found in her cabin comfort. She opened the satchel, took the knife. I came to give you what you gave me. Then she drew the blade across her palm, let the blood fall. He crossed the hay, already yellowing from lack of use, and made his way to the far corner. No hole, no mass, no sign of Letty, just her satchel neatly placed at the foot of the old beam. Inside it, her father's Bible, a cloth-wrapped knife. No blood, no letter, nothing else. Bo didn't speak. He just sat on the ground and stared at that empty place until Jasper called down to him, and only then did he whisper, "She's gone." The spring came fully within the week. Birds returned. The creek ran fast again. The trees opened their leaves in sudden bursts, like they'd been waiting for permission, and the cabin stayed warm. Not fever-warm, not unnatural, just warm, comfortable, livable, the kind of warmth a body sinks into without thinking. The people stayed, at first just until they figured out what to do, but then longer. Clara took over care of the livestock. Jasper patrolled the ridge and set traps. Bo repaired the roof and added a third room off the back. They kept the hatch in the floor sealed, but they didn't fear it, because the ground had stopped breathing. Whatever it had wanted, whatever bargain had been made, it was satisfied. For now, years passed. Children grew. The valley flourished again. Others moved in. Neighbors returned from winter shelters and burned-out farms. Word spread of the cabin on the ridge, of the warm earth, the always milk goat, the children who never coughed. No one mentioned Letty at first. It hurt too much. But then came the stories, that she'd fed the land with her own hands, that she'd traded her soul for warmth, that she'd walked into the dark and left light behind. The preacher called it blasphemy, but he came to warm himself at the hearth anyway. They named the place Sloane Ridge. Bo carved her name into the front beam above the door. No one asked him to, but no one touched it either. One night, 10 years later, Bo's grandson, barefoot, gangly, too curious for his own good, wandered down into the barn. He had a candle, stubby and near dead, and a scrap of flint he wasn't supposed to have. He found the old beam, found the satchel, opened it. The Bible was still there, and inside it, a note, folded, yellowed, written in a hand the boy didn't recognize. He brought it to Bo. The old man read it once, then again. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, it was quiet. "It wasn't a monster," he said. "It was just lonely." The boy didn't understand, but he nodded anyway. Bo put the note in his coat pocket and never read it again. The winters came and went. The cabin endured. The warmth held. No more people vanished. No more roots crawled from mouths. No more knockings from the floor. But sometimes, just sometimes on the coldest nights, if you stood still near the old beam, you could feel something, a presence, a watching, not angry, not hungry, just aware. And in that strange, silent warmth, some swore they could hear her voice, not words, not prayers, just breath. Letty Sloane, still keeping watch, from beneath, forever warm, forever waiting.